You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia Adventure Foods. Now, I normally don't mention this, but just in case you're new to the show, I'm Steve Adams, and I'm Mighty Blue. We're up to episode number 87, and it is going to be kind of different today. Most weeks, my main guest is an out-and-out hiker, somebody who has spent hours on end making their way along a trail on foot. Now, you'd hardly apply that term to my guest today, Devan Horn. Devan is, well, a phenomenon. She's 25 years old. In fact, it was her birthday on the day that we spoke. And she's already packed in more in her 25 years than most people do in an entire lifetime. Devan was introduced to me by my podcasting mentor and now a good friend, Glenn Hebert. Glenn latched onto this show from the very first episode, and he's been really helpful to me with ideas and development of this podcast and the Hiking Radio Network. Glenn is the owner of the Horse Radio Network. Bit of a clue there. And this introduces Devan to you. She is a horsewoman, yet she recently hiked the Colorado Trail in a party with another 5 or 6 women and their horses. Quite how she did this is a great story in its own right. Yet Devan had so much more to share, and I hope that you'll enjoy listening to her. She'll be along soon. Funnily enough, and I hadn't thought about it until just now, my second guest was also introduced to me by Glenn. This week on If I Did It Again, we have the tough girl herself, Sarah Williams. Sarah is an extraordinarily driven woman and hosts the Tough Girl podcast. She decided last year that she was going to hike the Appalachian Trail in 100 days, setting out at the beginning of June. Do you know what? That's exactly what she did. I love her spirit and her utter honesty on both her YouTube channel and in our interview. Sarah will be on after Devan. But before we get to any of that, who's hungry? How about those days when you struggle through the morning, probably got 10 miles under your belt, and breakfast is a distant memory? It's lunchtime and, you could always have your full Snickers of the day for yet another sugar rush. But sitting there in an empty shelter, protected from the bitter wind, I'm sure you'd really rather have Trailtopia's beef-flavoured ramen noodles with green beans, corn and mushrooms. D-flippin'-licious. And if you need to go without the gluten, all of Trailtopia's ramen noodle lunches and light dinners are available gluten-free. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. So, let's hear from somebody who really will exhaust you just listening to what she does with her life. Here is Devan Horn. Okay, I'd like to introduce you now to Devan Horn, not your traditional hiker. So, hi Devan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Now, we had a chat last night. You are an incredibly active person. So to give listeners some idea of the breadth of activities that you do, let's have a little short list of what your interests are.
Sure. Okay. Well, basically, I consider myself a long distance endurance athlete. I'm an ultra runner. I just recently completed my first 160 or 100-mile event. I am an endurance riding jockey, which means that I ride horses distances from 25 to 100 miles a day. I've done a couple 1,000-kilometer events in South Africa, Mongolia, and other places abroad. I do women's roller derby, martial arts, archery, pretty much anything that I can do that's physical.
You are a massive overachiever, and you're only 25 today, I understand. Happy birthday, by the way.
Today is my birthday. Thank you so much.
And at 25, so how did your background lead you to this type of life? Because this must take up a lot of your time.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out with my boyfriend yesterday actually how much free time of sitting down I have each week, and it's a very small number. With all of my activities and everything, and training, of course, for the physical demands of all of my sports, I don't have a whole lot of free time, which works for me because I'm just not the kind of person who really enjoys sitting around.
So what does your boyfriend think of all that, or does he do this as well?
No, luckily we're polar opposites. He's very zen, very good at chilling me out. Really kind of complements my nature. So we get along really well.
That's helpful. Um, so, how did you get into this in the first place? All these different things, or was this something within you always when you were a youngster? You always wanted activity because
Yeah.
these are extreme activities, aren't they?
Exactly. When I was a child, I was so annoying. My parents would just drop me off at the local stable for days at a time. And I'd work
Uh,
my butt off and just really enjoy being with the animals and being outside and riding as much as I wanted. And I really just could not give that up as I grew older, even through college. There was always something.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Now, you said you're an ultra runner
Yes.
and a long distance endurance horse rider, but what did you do last year that originally piqued my interest in you as perhaps a hiker?
Well, I have a little bit of a reputation for being kind of a crazy person and taking on long distance. And I
Just
was
justifiably, by the way,
Yeah.
by the sound of
Yeah,
things.
no, usually if someone messages me with a bad idea, I'm usually the first one to start packing and handling logistics. But my
Nice.
friend Reagan had the idea to take our horses and do a through hike in quotation marks of the Colorado Trail, a 500-mile journey from Denver, Colorado to Durango, Colorado. And I said, sure.
Wow.
When do we start?
So how did that work out? Tell us about it.
So it took us a little bit to iron out the details, but what ended up as our final team were five women: Lissa, Reagan, Jess, Annie, and myself. Five women, and there's six horses. We took one extra horse. And we
Uh-huh.
just started from scratch. I mean, we joined a bunch of hiking groups on Facebook. We started putting together logistics and food stuff for a 30-day sustained trek. This was going to be my very first time that long in the backcountry. So obviously, I had the horse thing down. I had the endurance thing down. I just needed to learn the logistics of
Yeah.
hiking.
But when we talked about that, you said you actually did quite a bit of hiking itself. You didn't. They were riding. You were hiking a lot of the time.
Right. So about a month before we left, I decided that I wanted to do it on foot, which of course took a lot of planning because I had to keep up with the horses and I needed to find some way to make it work. So what I ended up doing was bringing a pack pony, and he carried what ended up being my 25 pounds of gear, and I
Oh, excellent.
walked the Colorado Trail.
So you had a 500-mile slack pack. Fantastic.
Exactly right.
Which means you carry virtually nothing. That is definitely the way to do it, I must say. So how do you handle the logistics of something like that? Because my guess is the horses do not survive on Snickers and ramen noodles every day.
No, although my horse really did eat all of my dried mangoes, which was very upsetting. Um, no,
Nice.
the horses basically had a divvied ration each day, and we would also end our forward progress around 3 p.m. each day to give the horses a few hours to graze. And then, of
Right.
course, they had to be corralled at night. So they would only have, from about 3 a.m. to about 9 p.m. to graze and get all the food that they needed for the next day. Logistically speaking, I'm absolutely 100% certain that my horse had more gear than I did going into the Colorado Trail. Uh, we made a lot of friends along the way, and a lot of hikers were very interested in how we were doing it and seemed to think that taking a horse was the easy way. And I always laughed at them and said, it's like camping with a 1,200-pound toddler that you have to feed.
God
Yeah,
almighty.
they're
Yeah.
a lot of work in a normal situation, and in the backcountry, making sure that they have everything they need is quite frankly harrowing.
Yeah, and of course, the other part of logistics. I mean, one thing about hiking for me anyway was actually getting out of the backcountry and also going into towns between hikes. And I'm guessing you and your horse can't just jump on the back of a flatbed and
Exactly.
hitch into
Yeah,
town. So how does that work out? Did you just stay out there the whole
the
time?
hitchhikers are really kind of not keen on putting the horses in the back of their Land Rovers.
You think?
Yeah. So when we hit a town, if we wanted to go in and hitch a ride into town, we'd always designate one person to stay with the horses, and they would not get to go into town. And of course,
Oh,
anybody who went into town would bring them back food or pizza or whatever they needed.
you've really got to love horses to be hanging around with five horses. Is that? I'm not sure if safe's the word. They're all tied up, I presume. That's not too much of an
Oh
issue.
no.
And is
On our 0 days, they were free to wander and meander. So
oh
it was
gosh,
really kind of a shepherd position for whoever was staying there.
kind of nice in its own way, I would think. I can't imagine me ever doing it, especially the size I am now. But I'd imagine that must be quite a kind of a zen thing itself,
It
mustn't it? To
is.
be in the wild with 5 horses. How cool
I
is
think
that?
it's very zen, and I think it's also very empowering to have the ability to do it. Honestly, to basically have your friends screw off and go into Buena Vista, and be able to keep things at home. Keep the fire burning. I think it's very powerful.
So you did the whole 500
Yep.
miles, and how long did it take you to do?
We did it in exactly 30 days with 3 rest days, so it worked out to about a rest day every 10 days or so.
And what does a horse do on a rest day?
Hang out, graze, get their shoes redone. We had a farrier come and switch out the horse's shoes about halfway
Oh,
through.
cool.
Yeah, just enjoy themselves and rest.
How does that affect a horse? I mean, I don't. They can't tell you, obviously. I presume they do it with some joy. They're out and stuff. But what is the physical impact of a long distance journey on a horse?
Well, when I brought my horse on to the start of Denver, he didn't have a whole lot of muscling, and he was a little bit overweight. Uh, he was, in decent shape for a horse, but by the time we ended, his hindquarters looked like $1,000. I mean, he was a little leaner. He definitely dropped a little weight, but the muscle that he put on through the shoulder and the hindquarter was astonishing. I mean, he looked like he was built.
This is going to be a stupid question, so I apologize for asking it straight away. Can you tell when a horse is happy?
Oh, of course.
And
Of course.
well, fine. I'm glad it wasn't quite as stupid as it sounded to me when I asked it. But if you can tell it when a horse is happy, what was their morale like on the trail?
The horse that I had brought myself, his name is Zerk. He's a 13 hand pony. He was actually from a rescue situation. And
All right.
so I got to see him when he was unhappy at the beginning of life. But when I woke up in the morning
Oh,
around, 4 o'clock to get the packs loaded and the tents down, and just to see him, in the natural environment that a horse is supposed to be in, doing a job every day and enjoying the wilderness, I'm 100% willing to guarantee that he was just insanely happy to be there. And that goes with all the rest of the horses
cool.
that went with us. I feel like it was cathartic for them as well, just to kind of take out the normal technical things that they had to deal with each day and de-stress and not have to worry about anything but moving forward and enjoying the enjoying Colorado.
I'm sorry. I apologize for this, but I keep coming up with different questions. I'm thinking to myself, this is a stupid question as
No,
well. But
please.
it's well known with hikers that some form of post trail depression hits them after the trail. Did that happen to the horses at all? Did any of them get down when they finished? Which maybe that is a stupid question. Maybe I've gone a bit too far with that, but you know what I mean? Because there is a definite thing where this regular adrenaline rush, the endorphin rush of moving all day long every day, and then it suddenly stops. Did that impact any of your horses? Did you notice?
When I asked Zerk to when we hit Durango and we had to get back into the horse trailer to go to my friend's house to rest, Zerk hadn't seen a horse trailer for a long time, and he kind of stopped when I asked him to get in and kind of looked at me like, are we finished? Is this gonna happen again? Kind of questioning me.
Oh
Kind of
dear.
like your first
Oh
long
dear.
ride in a car after tackling the Appalachian Trail.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Yeah. So how do you reckon the two mindsets, of hikers and endurance riders varies, if indeed they do?
A lot of times on the trail, it felt like we were going very, very slowly. With running, you have to cover 100 miles a day on foot, so you're moving constantly at just as fast as you can
Wow.
go. With hiking, of course, it's much slower progress, and of course, you do it for longer. Um, it's a very different mindset to continue at a very slow pace as opposed to a race pace.
All right. Okay. Now, and hikers are also supposed to follow leave no trace principles. You can say what you like. You say what you like about horses, but man, they leave a
They
trace.
do.
How does that work out? How does that work out with
Well,
horses?
an average horse over the period of a day will have about 10 to 50 pounds of leavings, if you catch my drift. Um,
I
yes,
do.
so yes.
10 to 50.
Exactly. So whereas some, if you're expected to either bury or pack out anything that you bring on trail, including human waste. With a horse, they would just
Yeah.
be staggering under the weight of their own fecal matter over the course of even 2 days.
Yeah.
So it's just not possible. So as riders who are trying to be considerate of hikers, we made sure to spread it along the trail as well as kind of not keep them in the places that were so we could sort of tell were favorite campgrounds. We tried to keep the horses out of the places where
Yeah.
it looked like people had pitched tents in the past, and just kind of try to be
Right.
considerate and hope that they understood that we couldn't, pack out 50 pounds of crap.
Well, I knew I was going to ask you this. You said, in fact, though, that horse crap is entirely different to human fecal matter, as you called it.
Exactly right. So
Tell us about that.
a carnivore's fecal matter will be on the trail, visible and smelling for upwards of a week to a month. If somebody has an accident on trail, you'll know about it for the summer season, pretty much. Um, with horse manure, it's just dried grass and a little bit of bionic matter. It'll break down within less than 2 or 3 days. In rain, it'll be gone in less than a day. So all it does is add soil nutrients to the soil and break down really easily.
Okay, cool. Did you get any friction with hikers when you came across them on the Colorado Trail? Because I can see why that might be an issue with some people, but then perhaps I guess it's a case of can't we all get along? And how did the hikers approach you?
Every hiker that we met on the trail was extraordinarily supportive and enthusiastic and willing to share their tips and tricks and, oh, I went into this town and it was amazing. You guys should really try to get out there. Nobody on the trail was ever inconsiderate or rude or condescending to us for trying to do this journey. The Facebook groups, on the other hand, really kind of did
Oh,
bring it
please.
up a couple of times. So I guess that's the difference between, being on the trail and being on the internet.
Yeah. Did you bother defending yourself at all or not?
If people got kind of rowdy at me at Facebook, I just basically told them, horses built a lot of the long distance trails in our country, in our community, especially in Colorado. A lot of that trail was broken by mule plow. So you're welcome.
Good answer. I bet that shut a few of them. Well, the thing is, it doesn't shut anybody up, does it? They're still behind the screen. They can say what they like.
Yeah, and I do sympathize. I mean, nobody wants to step in horse dung, but it's really not that big of a deal. You'll get over it. It's dirt. If you're afraid of dirt, you shouldn't be in the backcountry.
Very true. Now, tell us about the Mongol Derby, because for those of you who are geographically challenged, and I do count myself as one of those in some ways, where does it run from and where does it run to?
So
It's on the Russian steppes, isn't it?
yeah, so to be perfect, to start at base one, Mongolia is a country that is sandwiched in between Russia and China, because I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
the race runs over 1,000 kilometers, sort of east of the main city of Ulaanbaatar. And that is a challenge in which you cover 1,000 kilometers, which works out to about 650 miles, over the course
Wow.
of between 6 and 10 days. So that is a race, and logistically very different from the Colorado Trail in that you are moving just as fast as you can. I would compare it to your Appalachian Trail. Your conquest of the Appalachian Trail and Scott Jurick's conquest of the Appalachian Trail. Little different pace, same idea, little different pace.
A lot different. Trust me, a lot different place.
Exactly.
Place. And he was about 200 days less than me as well. Amazing.
Unbelievable.
So you start this race. You literally go under a flag and all gallop off into the
Yes.
distance. You're not with the same horse, or not with the same horse all the time, are
No,
you?
so it's a recreation of Genghis Khan's Mongolian Empire's postal system, in which horses
That's
would
right.
would one of the greatest things that he accomplished during his empire, and one of the reasons he was so successful in his conquest of Europe, was that he was able to relay information and orders so quickly. And how he did that was to establish
Yeah.
command posts every 25 miles, and have riders galloping with messages in between. So the Mongol Derby kind of imitates that system, in which you get on a horse, you ride them for 25 miles, get off, switch to another horse, ride the next horse for 25 miles, sort of like a relay with a
Oh.
human baton.
You were indeed that baton. So how often were you sleeping on that trail, or were you riding pretty much most of the time?
So the Derby does have rules where you can't ride when the sun goes down, so you do get a break, luckily. But from sun up to sundown, it is ride as hard as you can, as fast as your horses will allow, and just cover as much ground as you can.
And what did that do for you physically? Because that is quite intense as well, isn't it? So you're in a saddle 10 to 12 hours a day, riding quite fast. That must take quite a lot out of you, mustn't
I tell everybody who wants to do it, it takes 5 years off your lifespan, period. Um, at the
it?
very least 5 years out of the cartilage in your
You've
knee.
done it more than once, haven't you?
I know, yeah. This year will be my third time, so I'm really, really, cutting my life string here.
God dear me. So, and what did you do? Would you camp? Did you camp at night, or were there lodgings at these 25-mile posts?
So you had the option of camping inside the post, yes. That's the safest thing that you could do. But if you were trying to win, a lot of times you would find yourself, if you were using all of your time, you'd find yourself out in the open. In which case, you and your horse had to fend for yourself. Um,
Right. Wow, that's
yep,
something.
exactly. And so since you're racing, you're obviously carrying a lot less gear, um,
Yeah.
which means that you're going really, really militaristic and minimal with your gear. So what we took on the Colorado Trail almost felt like a five-star hotel in comparison to Mongolia.
And is there a male female thing, or is it literally open to all? And were there many other women on that ride?
It is open to all colors, all comers, all nationalities. They
Come,
do an interview process, but yes, there are quite a few females who attempt this race each year.
wow, that's amazing. That really is amazing. Well, not just for females, but people anyway. That is quite a journey.
It is considered by the Guinness Book of World Records the longest and hardest horse race in the world.
Wow. Is there another one similar to it anywhere?
Yes, there's one event that popped up after the success of the Derby called the Sandy Mount Express 1000 in South Africa, which I've also had the pleasure of completing. Um,
God.
yeah,
When did you start all this stuff? When you were 5? I mean, you've been doing all these
nine,
things.
nine
Are
actually.
you sponsored for all these activities, or do you hold down a full-time job?
No, I have a full-time 9 to 5 plus job
Oh,
here in Houston, Texas, and I also take on sponsors for specific events. For example, my sponsor for 2018 is Fitz Equestrian Riding Gear, which has been
cool.
outfitting me for the Mongol Derby this year.
That's cool. Good plug. Excellent segue.
Yeah. Thank you.
So on other trails, this is a hiking show, so I've got to bring some hiking back into it. So
Of
on other
course.
trails, say the Pacific Crest Trail. So I know people go on the Pacific Crest Trail on horses. How much do you think you'd be able to ride that, and how much do you think you would need to hike, or do you not know?
I don't know. The Pacific Crest Trail is something that I'm really interested in and really wanted to do. However, I haven't done a whole lot of research into it at this point. Although I do know that there are people who have ridden literally the entire thing, so it is possible.
To ride the whole thing?
Yes.
Man.
Yeah. There's a documentary on Netflix called Unbranded, which follows a group of men who did the entire Pacific Coast Trail.
And they did the same thing. Did they take the same horse, or did they do the relay type thing where,
No, they took the same horses, and their outfit was a little bit different than mine. I really learned a lot from watching their documentary on what to do and what not to do, and used it
do
as a guideline for my own.
you think you may do that one day?
I'm thinking about it.
2,600 miles.
Yeah, I
2,600 miles is a long, long way, isn't it?
yeah, it is. I'd like to save my treks for when I can't race anymore. I was telling my family earlier that I'd like to get all of the really fast, horrible, harebrained stuff out of the way, and then retire as a long distance hiker and trekker.
Oh dear, that's right. So I'm sure you must have handled these. How do you handle water crossings with a horse, especially and certainly the Pacific Crest Trail, or definitely the Sierras? There's some very fierce rivers, and it's tough to get across. How do horses cope with that?
The horses swim fine. They really don't have any issues with water crossing. The biggest issue that we had on the Colorado Trail with the horses were the snowpacks. We started late enough so that we thought we would not have to deal with snow. And of course, Colorado obviously doesn't listen to you when you tell it you don't want snow. And we had a couple of places where we had to cross pretty substantial snowpacks. And the horses have
Wow.
trouble, especially the Texas ones who've never seen snow. They really have trouble navigating them.
Wow. So what's your hike on the Colorado Trail? Did that give you any urge to ditch your horses for 6 months and head out on just 2 feet, or will horses always be part of your future? Well, certainly in the near future.
In the near future, you have no idea how many times I fantasized about just going off on my own while I was on that trek because the horses are just an incredible amount of work. But I really do love them and I really like being around them. If I were to go to do a through hike, I think I'd want to bring my dog. Just because I love animals, I love kind of bouncing ideas off of them. They really have some of the best. When you're having a rough spot in life, if you just talk it over with a dog or a horse, it really kind of puts things into perspective. At least for me.
So,
um,
come on. So your dog answers you, or just looks at you in a certain way, and you know what they're saying.
exactly. Yeah, I'm an animal person, but kind of more than I'm a people person. So I can really kind of tell when. And of course, my dog has this really good look that says, Devin, you're full of shit, and she calls me on it all the time. So.
I must say that's been one of the issues I've read about, obviously online, about taking dogs on the trail. And I've seen it. I've seen it myself as well. And everybody says my dog loves it, and that's great. But you can't go through the Smoky Mountains. You can't go up Katahdin with the dog, and there are a number of places where it's kind of limited. So I always wonder what that dog's thinking every day. They do 7 or 8, 10 miles, 15 miles in a day. Then they get to the camp at night, take the pack off, or their owner takes their pack off. I always think they're thinking, "Oh my God, thank God that's over." And then the next morning, the pack goes on again. They're saying, "We're going again.
Yeah,
What's going on?" And this keeps going on. Then think like your horse. They thought their days. He thought his days of the horse trailer were dead and buried.
exactly.
And suddenly the dog's hiking again. So it's quite a tough thing for a dog, I would
Yeah,
think.
I was always thinking if I took Zerk, which is the horse that I went with the Colorado Trail on, if I ever lined him up and pointed him at the Pacific Coast Trail, I'm always wondering if he would look at me or look at the trail. Like I'm always wondering what his reaction would be if I ever said, "Okay, we're gonna do this for 6 months. Are you game?"
Oh dear me. So what's your next adventure? You're doing the Mongol Derby again this year.
Yes.
What other things you got lined up in the the next 5 years of your crazy adventures?
Oh, my 5-year plan. Well, there's a couple of ultra runs that I'm really interested in doing, including the Western States in California and Hard Rock, which actually goes through the tail end of the Colorado Trail, and
All right.
kind of goes in through Silverton and Ouray and that area. I love Colorado so much, so that's really I'm always keen to go back. There's also a couple of sustained ultra runs that go on through more than one day, called like the Fire and Ice in Iceland, which is I think a 5-day challenge that adds up to
Wow.
about 320 kilometers on foot. And like I said, as soon as my knees tell me that I can't go fast anymore, I'm gonna retire as a long distance hiker.
And would you ever consider trying the AT as this fastest known time thing in
I've
the
been
AT, and doing it about, and I think the current record is 43, 44 days, something like that, and that is more than 50 miles a day. Is that doable?
you know
Do you think for you?
Of course, anything's doable for me. I just have to point myself at it. 40,
Gee, I love that.
41 days sounds like a good thing to aim for, really.
Ooh. I tell you what, you would be very welcome to come back on this show. I tell you, if you even considered doing that, I'd love to hear if you ever thought of doing that, because that would be a fantastic achievement. You wouldn't be away from your horses for too long, and I can't see 41 days being beaten by too many people. So,
That would be great. Yeah, I mean, of course, Scott Jurek and the others who have done it in less than 50 are phenomenal athletes, and
yeah,
but I do know also that they're very welcoming people. And if I shot them a message and said, "Listen, I'm after your record," their response would probably be, "Here's what worked for me. Here's what didn't. Good luck."
that's cool. That is so cool,
Yeah.
and I'm pleased that exists between you ultra competitive ultra runners.
Yeah, that's the brilliant thing about ultra running is that And I'm sure also in the hiking community, it is you versus the trail, not you versus everyone else. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. That is a perfect way to finish, and you're absolutely right. But I really appreciate you coming to talk to us about it. When Glenn suggested speaking to a rider, I thought, well, we're actually a hiking show, but really there are so many similarities, and I really appreciate you coming on and pointing them out to us and
No
telling us all about it.
problem. I really enjoyed it, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good to talk to you. Bye then.
Bye.
She's certainly different, isn't she? What an interesting young woman. She is constantly active and pushing herself. It's funny, when I started doing this show, I thought that very few people would surprise me or make my jaw drop. Well, you may not hear my jaw drop, but I'm blown away every single week by the commitment that people have to either that moment in their life or to some time in the past. For those of you who want to get into the woods for a 10-day, 20-day, or even a 100-day hike or a horse ride, the first step is to commit yourself. The rest is just details. Before we get to another overachieving young woman, Sarah Williams, I want to report back on some of your suggestions for an alternative name for flip-flopping, a name I just do not like. The first one, and my favourite, Llama, gave me OBO, OBO, and it stands for out, back and out again. Stephanie Rose Hakin said no-so or so-no. Jean Bellman Herrera or Jean Bellman Herrera, FFBO, which is flip-flop bound. John Llewellyn said no-so. Linda Silova said nobo-sobo or no-so-bo. My favourite, as I said, is Llama's oboe. If that was ever adopted, you could be a nobo, a sobo, or an oboe. It just fits. What do you guys think? Email me at steve@mightyblueontheat.com with your favourite. Now, one of my favourite people to interview, Sarah Williams. It's actually the fourth time that Sarah has been on the show, and this time it is for If I Did It Again. Yep, if ever Sarah were glad to do a 100-day sprint up the AT again, what do you think she may do differently? Let's find out. Here's Sarah. Okay, we're on with Sarah Williams. You may remember we saw Sarah or listened to Sarah a few times this year as she tried and achieved the Appalachian Trail in 100 days. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I am fabulous. Thank you so much for having me back on again. It's going to be so much fun.
Good to speak to you again. And as I said, you completed the trail in 100 days because of the time restriction that you had. If time hadn't been a constraint, how different would you have made your hike if you'd had, say, 6 months?
To be honest, this is actually something I have actually been thinking about a lot because I honestly can't believe, looking back now, reflecting back, I have no idea how I hiked 2,200 miles in 100 days. I mean, it is beyond ridiculous. I can't even comprehend doing it. And I suppose thinking about it, my hike would just be so different. I think I would have connected with more people. I would have, hopefully built up more of a trail family. There wouldn't have been this constant pressure on me every single day. And by the way, that wasn't pressure from anybody else. That was pressure from myself wanting to do it in this deadline. I think I probably would have just been even more relaxed. I don't know, had more chance to spend in nature and to really appreciate it. I mean, while I was on the trail, I made it almost like my mission to make sure that I was appreciating it and I was enjoying the journey while I was on it because I knew it was going so quickly. But I think that the main thing that I missed out on was trail family and building up relationships, because although I got to meet individuals and trail angels and meet people in shelters and so on and so forth, I didn't really get an opportunity to build longer relationships while I was on the trail.
I was wondering that because you were doing, well, certainly towards the end, you're doing 30-mile days regularly, weren't you? On consecutive days, many a time.
It was quite funny because I'd bump into people and they'd be like, "Oh, where did you walk from?" And I'd mention a campsite and they were like, "Oh, we were there 3 days ago."
Of course, yeah. That was the thing. Did you actually form any relationships with other hikers? Because with those high mileages, I should imagine, certainly if you were doing, say, I don't know, 100 miles every 3 or 4 days, it must have been very difficult for you to spend any time with anybody else.
It really was. I mean, I think there were moments, there were minutes, and there were sometimes hours when I would get to spend time with hikers. And sometimes you can just feel a bond with people, even though you've only just met them. You might just be having breakfast with them, while you're in like a hostel. And it would just be brief moments, but sometimes that's all I needed, to get my social fix and my social fill to keep on going.
Did you find yourself lonely out there for that reason? Because I know that for me, meeting people was the thing that made the hike. So I'm wondering how, if you were, when you're actually on the trail, hiking all day long, were you lonely?
Do you know what's interesting? I was never lonely while I was out on the trail, but I'm lonely now, which is very, very strange, being back, in my home, in my comfortable environment. But I think while I was on the trail, I didn't look at it as loneliness. I just looked at this incredible opportunity to spend time by myself, just out in nature, and to really get that quality time just to think and to be, and for there to be, no external pressures. And so loneliness didn't really come into it for me. Like I do enjoy spending time by myself, and I'm very comfortable, in my own skin. But I think what I'm finding now is I've really noticed how lonely and how isolating doing my podcasting, working from my bedroom, you've probably seen it on Instagram stories, and spending 15, 16 hours a day on my laptop. That's when I feel lonely, even though, I'm on social media all the time and I'm engaging on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And it's just not the same as having those daily interactions, which I was getting on the trail, even just passing people and people wishing me a good morning and a good evening and how's everything going. And I mean, I remember at one point I had quite an emotional day in the White Mountains, and I bumped into a listener from the Tough Girl Tribe. I just burst into tears on her. She gave me a big hug, gave me this pep talk. And, it's moments like that you could get on the trail, but I don't get that at home. So it's quite strange at the moment, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I'm now doing 4 podcasts, so the time I'm spending podcasting as well is more than excessive, as you can imagine. And you do tend to find yourself stuck indoors. I've done some volunteer work recently, almost so I can get out of doors. It's kind of amazing, really.
No, but I agree. And I've actually started, I had to start working in a local coffee shop at the weekend because I was losing the ability to talk and to communicate, which sounds ridiculous for somebody who likes talking as much as I do. But I just needed some real interactions. I mean, you can get so much from social media, but you can't beat, talking to people face to face in real life.
You're absolutely right. So, but when you're out there, and as I say, spending a lot of time by yourself, were you ever afraid of either animals or even people?
I wasn't afraid, but I would say I'm very conscious of my safety. So,
Right.
for example, when I'm coming up to main roads or crossing roads and stuff, I'd always probably stop 20, 30 meters beforehand, just see who's out there, what's going on, just to see, is it safe for me to cross? Equally, when I was camping, I would make sure that my backpack wasn't outside, because you can look at, a backpack, especially the green Osprey one, which I was using, and say, that's a female backpack. But I would leave my hiking poles out, extended, so it looked like big. I'd possibly leave my shoes outside as well, because they're, big, manly feet. And equally, even though I love the color pink, I would not hike wearing pink, because I think then from a distance, a long way away, people can say, oh, that's a female walking by herself.
Yeah.
So I think those were things probably that I was doing maybe automatically. I didn't have a tracker. I was very conscious of not letting people know where I was on a regular basis, which is very difficult when people want to track your journey. But equally, it's also, if people know my rough starting point and they know how much I'm averaging, it's very easy to work out where you would be on the trail. And I didn't want to have that. But I wasn't scared while I was out on the trail. But I was applying a lot of common sense when I was out there. So, for example,
I want to say to you, I just want to interrupt a second, because that is really good advice for women. Typical guy, I wouldn't think about stuff like that because it doesn't really affect me. In that sort of thing. Just guys don't have to think about that. The mere fact that you thought about that, was that advice you took from other people? Was it something you just thought of as a sensible thing yourself?
It's probably just come from experience. It probably is advice from other people. I just can't remember which individuals. I think it is just something that you sort of pick up. I mean, even not wearing your hair in like a high ponytail or having it braided, little things like that. So from a distance, people can't really see that you're female. That's probably why also that I wouldn't walk in a skirt. I would always walk in, pants. Well, like leggings type things, just so from a distance, people can't make out that you are a female by yourself.
What a terrible thing. You know what? And you're absolutely right, of course, but what a terrible thing to have to think about. And I'm glad you did.
I would say 98% of the time out on the trail, I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel scared. But
Yeah.
also, I think that can come down to like who the individual person is, because I have no problem at all if I don't like somebody of walking away or thinking I don't like your vibe, slowing down or walking past or walking quicker, equally not
Yeah.
wanting to engage in conversations which make me feel uncomfortable, and I shut
Sure.
them down. Because I remember one guy started talking. He was actually an older guy. There was a table, quite a few of us, and he started talking about murders and rapes on the Appalachian Trail. And I was like, no, I'm not having this conversation, because I don't know what you're trying to gain from it, apart from maybe to intimidate me. And so I shut that down. And
Wow.
I think it depends again on your own individual confidence, because women are unfortunately taught to be, you've got to be nice, you've got to be liked. And many women will just sort of smile and let it continue because you don't want to cause a fuss. Whereas I'm like, no, I don't. You don't know me. I don't care about your thoughts. It's like, you're making me feel uncomfortable. I'm not standing for that. Yeah.
But look, given your 100-day time frame, even though you said it would be nice to meet some more people. So, say you did it again in 100 days, what would you have changed about that hike, or is the way you did it the way you would do it again? In other words, if you did it in 100 days again.
Unfortunately, there's not much that I can really change. I don't think, looking back, I was very fit when I started the trail. So I was doing the mileage that I could. I couldn't take that much time out to rest and recover. I could possibly have done my resupplies better, but equally
Right.
that's still very, very challenging when you're on a tight time frame. Um, I honestly don't see how I could do it better, doing it solo and unsupported. Great question. I'd probably try and be a little bit kinder to myself and not be, beating myself up. Come on, Sarah, you're such a failure. You're such a failure. Why are you behind schedule? But I sort of felt that I needed to go through that experience to almost make me okay with failing and failure.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about right now, the videos. Your videos, and we spoke obviously, and I started following them, and you said to me they get more emotional as time goes on. Oh my God, did they? Well, you were so raw. I thought to myself, would I put something like this out? And it was such a visceral reaction to everything that was going on around you. Had you considered prior to setting out how you would deal with that, or did you not even consider it would be an emotional journey?
I didn't even consider it. All I knew was that I wanted to share the journey so that people could follow along and join in. I was
Sure.
also, one of the things that I'm very conscious of doing is being authentic, basically, because I think many people have this wrong idea about challenges, and people can focus on the positive all the time. And I'm a positive person. I know how important it is to focus on the good stuff and the positive stuff and how
Yeah.
amazing it is. But equally, I think people need to be realistic and say, do you know what, look, this is not all sunshine and roses. When it has been raining day after day and your feet are wet and you're cold and you're tired and you're hungry and you've got another river crossing to go and you didn't expect it and there's no way for you to cross and and you've fallen over, it is emotional. And I think that's what I really wanted to share. I possibly didn't realize how raw it would get. And I think towards the end, like, talking to my camera was my release. That was my, human interaction, just speaking to my
Wow.
GoPro. And
Wow.
yeah, I think there was no other way for me to share it, because that was how I was feeling. That is exactly what I was going through. I wish I could have filmed more of it. But I don't think people would want to watch, hours and hours and hours of, being emotional. But I think something happens to your body when you are tired and exhausted and you've put it through a hell of an amount, a hell of amount, so that, you're just working on fumes towards the very end. And I don't even know,
Yes.
it's the mental mindset which is getting you through. And I think that the
Well,
tears.
because I knew you were going to finish, I could watch them. I tell you, if I was watching them not knowing what had happened, I think I would have thought, this is uncomfortable. I can't watch this because poor girl's going to fail and stuff, And it was so visceral, and it really struck me that I thought, people watching this and don't know how this ends, it must be sort of watching it open-mouthed almost, because you really got into it, didn't you?
Well, I actually had to give some warnings out. So and I'm honestly not joking, because I would sometimes 4 or 5 days later, I'd watch back and be like, "Whoa, that's quite intense." And I knew some of my followers, were my friends and their younger children who are 9, 10, 11 years old. I thought, actually, this is really emotional. So I was having to message them just to say, "Look, you're going to see a video coming up soon where I fall over, I'm by myself, I twist my ankle. There is lots of tears, but I just want you to let you know that was 2 weeks ago and I'm okay and everything's okay." But even with my family as well, because I didn't want them to worry. So I would message them as well saying, "Look, this has happened, but I am fine. Just prepare yourself," because I think it can be quite, emotional. So the interesting thing is that once these episodes will go up to 2, 3, 4 weeks later, because we were on, we didn't get the editing right and the posting right.
Sure.
I'd start getting bombarded with like text messages from people saying, and Facebook messages saying, "Oh my God, Sarah, are you okay? How is everything going?" But I'd be reading the messages and be like, "Oh, hold on, what's wrong? Like what?" And I'd be looking at myself thinking, I'm good. And they'd be like, "Oh, they've just watched the video. That's what it is."
Oh dear me. Yeah, well, good for you. Good for you for putting it out there, because, as you say, you're very real in these things you do, and I think it really came across strongly, and it's a great record of the journey. So I advise anybody who wants to see how tough this can be to listen to Sarah. And did you, when you got home? A lot of people have talked about this, and we've actually talked about it on the show before. Did you have to deal with any of the famous kind of post-trail depression? And did you notice any changes in yourself when you returned home? Or did other people notice any changes in you?
Such a great question. I had so much going on that when I came back, that I feel as though I did suffer from trail depression, but it wasn't sort of bam straight away. I was in the blues. I think it was really prolonged. So, I got to, finish the Appalachian Trail, drove to Boston with Jojo. I then had a week with my mum and my sister in Boston doing lots of great stuff. I came home for like 3 or 4 days, lots of sleep. And then we were off to France for a family holiday for another, 4 days in the Champagne region. Came back another 3 or 4 days. I was starting at university, and then bam, I was just, I was driving up to Lancaster. I was studying again. I was getting back into, my website and my business and, reconnecting with friends. That I don't think I really had the time, but equally, I should have given myself more time to get over it, because it's such a huge thing to do. And then, like I think, you mentioned it before we got on. I did share this very personal blog post about what has been going on the past few months. And like I say in the post, it's not dramatic. It's not crazy. It's not me complaining about my life, because I'm incredibly lucky. I do live with my parents. I'm looked after. I'm fully supportive. It's just something, doing the Appalachian Trail, I think I destroyed myself more than I realized. I mean, even just my weight loss. I mean, I'm now like 11 stone, and to think that I was under 9
That's 154. Stone. That's 154 pounds, and 9 stones, 128 pounds for the Americans.
Yes. And so even just that exhaustion, but basic things that I was struggling with. So, I would get text messages and I'd read them and think, I need to reply to this. But I didn't have the brain function, and this sounds ridiculous, that I didn't have the brain function to be able to compose a message in my head and then physically type it. That was
totally understand.
That was too exhausting.
I totally understand. It happened to me as well. It happens to nearly everybody I've spoken to on this. And the one thing that people say, and I think a number of us have concluded, that as long as you keep giving yourself another task to do or another goal to aim for, you should be more okay. But if you allow yourself to sink back a bit, it suddenly hits you, and it hit me really hard for several months. And then I eventually started writing, and that became my task I had to do every single day. And that really helped me.
Yeah, I mean, but it's so tough. But I think that the challenging thing is that people who've never experienced this, they've got no way to be able to empathize or understand what you're going through. Because I've had friends say to me, Sarah, it's a text message. You can always reply to a text message. I've had tough days at work where I've been working, 15, 16 hours a day behind a screen, and I can come home and I can always reply to a text message. And it's very difficult to sort of say, I get that. I've done the long hours in the corporate environment, and I know how how mentally exhausted you can be. But with the trail, it's not only mental exhaustion, it's physical exhaustion, and it's at a different level, and it's very, very difficult to describe. And also it's been a way of life for so long. You're out on the trail for 5.5, 6 months. It's a long time to be out there, and even for me, a relatively short period on the trail at 100 days. But physically and the intensity wise, it's a shock to the body, and it does. I think you've got to be kind to yourself to allow yourself to get back to being healthy, and to get back to being you, and to get back to the capacity levels, for example, that I had for work before I left.
Sure.
And so sometimes it is about being kind and not beating yourself up and being, God, Sarah, you're so lazy. Why are you watching Netflix again? And all you've done today is eat.
Hey, are you back on track now? It's 10 months since you started. I guess 7 months since you finished. Are you back on track?
Yes, just about. But I'd say even up to the beginning of April, my diet was horrendous, just in my cravings and what I was eating. So normally I'm very low carb, high protein, high fat. I don't eat bread, pasta, white potatoes. Past few months, I mean, everything and anything. It's just ridiculous. But the problem is, I think there are knock-on consequences to when you're having a bad diet. I think that has knock-on consequences to sort of like your mental health, your physical health. I was struggling to get back to going to the gym and being, and energetic. And it was so easy to make the easier / the wrong choices, to have that extra flapjack, to have that extra piece of cake, which is fine in moderation, but when you're doing it all the time, it's not right. And I think that was almost like the hardest thing. I'd also say I suffered a little bit from and this is going to sound crazy, but body dysmorphism, because so I would look at myself in the mirror and think, oh my God, I am absolutely ginormous, I'm a monster. And it sounds very difficult, but when you think about how I was probably like a size 6, less, 100, 128 pounds, absolutely minuscule. And because I was so used, for 2 and a bit months, 3 months actually, being that size, being that weight. And then suddenly when I did start to put weight on and I got back to my normal weight, so not my, just my proper size, of the size that I should be, I was looking in the mirror thinking, oh my, what do I look like? I'm just so massive and huge, and I'm not. And this isn't like, this isn't like a simply thing, oh, Sarah, you look amazing. It was like mentally I needed to make that switch to say, this is the new normal now. Being, size 6, 128 pounds, that was not your normal. That was just a very extreme period that you're going through.
And I saw you in some of those videos at the end, you had nothing on your arms at all, did you? You were very, very skinny. Certainly I saw on your arms, definitely you lost muscle on your arms in the trail, didn't you?
Oh,
you look like you
my
did.
hip bones sticking out, being rubbed.
Of course, yeah, you said, yeah.
And even just I wish, the only thing I do wish, I wish I'd sort of measured myself when I got back, measured my thighs, measured my arms, just to see how tiny I really, really was. But
Oh, please. When I got back, I was size 34-inch waist, which I hadn't been since I was about 11 years old, and I'm back up to 42. I've put on about 70 pounds since the trail, 80 pounds since the trail. It's unbelievable for me. It totally threw me out in every single way. It entirely changed me. So, it was one of those things that you kind of have to cope with. But I'm glad you're feeling better, because I watching those videos, I was wondering how it would have affected you. So I'm really pleased we had the chance to catch up. And maybe you can do another long distance hike in the future, and we can record you doing something about that as well.
Oh, who knows? But I'll definitely let you know.
All right, Sarah. Well, good talk to you, and hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
Oh, thank you. Great to chat.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
And now I know that she's a Brit, and you may think that I'm biased, but what an attitude she has. That was longer than my normal chats for this segment, but she really gave us some good advice. Sadly, women do have to consider their own safety on the trail, and I think that Sarah articulated those safety measures really well. I hope that the women among you who are concerned about your personal security when hiking give what Sarah said some thought. It's common sense, but we aren't always blessed with it, are we? I tell you, if she does firm up the idea of hiking the PCT, I can feel another show coming on for the Hiking Radio Network. Actually, talking about the Hiking Radio Network, I wanted to remind you all that you can hear all of our shows at hikingradionetwork.com, including our subscription show, Dixie Live on the Continental Divide Trail. If you want to hear the first 4 podcasts of the Dixie Show for free, head over to dixielive.libsyn.com, which is dixielive.libsyn.com, dixielive.libsyn.com, and decide if you'd like to subscribe. Whether you subscribe or not, please go and check them all out. They're fun. The other thing I wanted to tell you about the Hiking Radio Network is that I've been given an idea for a new, very short show by a listener, Crystal Glynn. Crystal suggested I should source stories from you all. They're kind of campfire stories where either you or I can record them and play them as separate episodes. I don't think they'll be much more than 10, maybe 15 minutes long, and maybe a neat way to introduce hikers and non-hikers to what goes on during this long, long hike. If you feel that this has some merit, why not write out your stories? I'll record the best ones and we'll see where that takes us. They may become part of this show or they may form a show in its own right. Any feedback or ideas, I am always ready to listen to. We've got a couple of 5-star podcast reviews. Gbolt18 says that he or she is currently through hiking and is staying at Joe Mitchell's Four Pines. Probably moved on by now. Gbolt says, having a blast, but when the uphill starts to get to me, I click on your podcast and find instant inspiration. Love it, Gbolt. Example 780654, who comes up with these names, says, I will be doing my first section hike of the AT in 2 weeks, and it is in large part because of your show. I'm even going to bring along some Trailtopia adventure food with me. Excellent news, example 780654. Keep spreading the word. Next week, we have a father and his 14-year-old stepson. Spencer Liebolt and Blake Bateman are on the trail this year, heading towards halfway. I wondered how that dynamic would work out. So come back next week to find out. By the way, I've been meaning to tell you all for about 2 years now, or a year now, that I am on Twitter at AT Mighty Blue. That's capital AT Mighty Blue. And I love if some of you tweeted at me, whatever that means. Now, before we go, we've got the next chapter of my book, Hiking the Appalachian Trail is Easy, especially if you've never hiked before. This week, I'm telling you about things that you don't need. And as I was reading and recording it, I realised what a jerk somebody found me on the trail. I'd forgotten about it, and it was a bit of a shock when I came to it in the book. I'll see you next week. Chapter 7, What You Don't Need. One mantra that has to be quickly learned is the need to hike the way in which you want to hike. Whatever you decide, the vast majority of people will be there to help you achieve your goal. Nobody will ignore you if you ask for advice, and pretty much everybody will respond positively if you reach out to them. A bad attitude is rare, but it does exist in some places. Unfortunately, there are still some who believe that they have cornered the market on the correct way to hike the AT. Further, should you decide not to comply with their ideas, then in some way you are not doing things properly. I'll only waste sufficient time on such palpable garbage to tell you that whatever somebody else thinks, this is your hike and not theirs. They don't know what you're trying to achieve with your attempt and what it may have taken to get you on the trail. It seems to make sense to me that, having prepared and sacrificed to stand at the southern or northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, you should be the one deciding how to go about the next few months. To show that I'm not completely full of sanctimonious crap, I'd like you to read a message I got when preparing my 2 books on my journey of the AT. I'd reached out to Facebook members I met on the trail and asked them to recount meeting me and any impressions I made, both good and bad. I got at least a dozen responses, and nearly all were positive. You were great, bro, or enjoyed meeting you, man. However, one stuck with me, and I will reproduce it precisely as written. The note was from a woman called Erin. Irish Spring here, mine were not good results. Met you in the Smokies, holding court, trying to get a through hiker to eat something, even after they explained why they were not eating to you. Well, that's just dumb, mate. Needless to say, they were doing a hike in memory of a deceased trail brother. The seat you bought was unique, however your attitude was poor at times, even bordering hateful toward the trail and others. Hope the trail lessened any issue you had, and headed back to Florida you could look back and mirror what you wanted to change. You can't say fairer than that. Reading it through, as I did many times, I accepted that it was me. It certainly sounded like a phrase I would use. I was more shocked than anything else, as I hadn't intended to be a pain in the arse to anybody. That said, I've known all my life that a person's perceptions are their reality. My attitude must have really gotten under the skin. I tried to balance this one negative comment with the remainder, all of which had been friendly and positive. I guess it goes to show that a bad attitude can be given off to others, even when you think you're well-meaning. Erin, you taught me something about myself that I didn't know I needed to learn. For that, I thank you. You can be the most careful, most prepared, and the best equipped person on the trail, but in an instant, your journey could come to an end. With at least 5 million steps to take, only one of them needs to land badly, and your ankle could send you tumbling and on the way back home. While this is a reality check, there is nothing you can really do to prevent this happening, beyond concentrating as best you can and watching where you step. I've told friends and family on my return that the biggest factor in my ability to finish the trail was the luck of not injuring myself sufficiently seriously to bring my own journey to an end. I fell endlessly, though never so badly as to prevent me from getting back to my feet and shouting out the number of the fall. This hike isn't supposed to be easy. However, it can be accomplished if you pay attention, take care of the basics of day-to-day life, and hope for good luck the majority of the time. Make sure that, at the end of the day, when preparing for sleep, you check your body for unwanted visitors in the shape of deer ticks. These little darlings spend a while crawling on you before burrowing into your skin and doing their damnedest to pass on Lyme disease to you. Check them out and remove them. Easy peasy. Filter your water, no matter how tired you are. I met many people who often failed to do so, and they were fine. Others weren't so lucky, and apparently norovirus is no laughing matter. Do your best to avoid it by taking a few precautions. On the subject of cleanliness and norovirus, you'll soon learn that shaking hands by way of introduction is a little passé. Fist bumps soon became the norm, and having to deal with bodily functions au naturel, you'll quickly understand why. One of the biggest problems for me as a first-time hiker was having an idea of how much stuff I would need on my hike. I knew that some items were mandatory, such as my tent, my quilt and my sleeping pad. Additionally, I thought that at least a single change of clothes would be necessary. Beyond that, pretty much everything seemed optional, though often desirable. I met a number of people for whom hiking meant carrying no stove, with cold food their only option. Being a bit of a trencherman, I really couldn't have imagined going without hot food on the AT. Funnily enough, I now think that I wouldn't have minded had my choices only been cold. The amount of clothing is clearly down to each individual, and packing appropriately for the changing seasons is advisable. Most thru hikers travel from Springer Mountain, Georgia, in the south. To accomplish this in optimal conditions, particularly if you intend going straight through from south to north, the great majority of hikers will need to leave sometime in either March or April to allow for a finish at Mount Katahdin before the middle of October. Georgia in March can be cold, with spring still around the corner. That said, I had snow in the Smokies in April, so you need to be prepared for rapidly changing weather. I remember a night in the snow that had me fearing for my safety. I was wearing every piece of clothing that I carried, including my waterproof jacket and pants. The feeling of numbness in my legs, spreading up from my feet, is one that has stuck with me ever since. Of course, I made it through, yet I held on to my warmer clothes longer than was strictly necessary. Once again, go with what you feel. Only you know the tolerance you might have for cold, so make your decisions wisely. For some reason, my wife seemed to think that wearing a whistle on a string round my neck would enable me to repel bears. While I never had to test this theory, and I'm glad that I didn't, I wore it every day in order to make her feel safer on my behalf. Exactly how this bear scaring technique would have worked in field conditions, I couldn't say. However, I know that she was always happy to see the whistle around my neck whenever I posted photographs. A few months before I set out, I joined the Appalachian Trail Club of Florida, which was conveniently located fairly close to my home. The club was such a friendly, encouraging group of hikers and would-be hikers, and I was made to feel very welcome. Of course, I felt like a fish out of water, boldly announcing that I intended to hike the AT for my very first hike in a couple of months' time. I was then informed of a time-honoured tradition, the shakedown. The gist of this potentially humiliating event is that the hiker brings in his or her loaded pack, and then the group picks over the contents with the unbridled enthusiasm of rats in a Pizza Hut. I stood before my peers and started to unload my pack, explaining my rationale for including each item. I could see the odd smile start to appear on the faces of these veteran hikers. Unable to distinguish between encouragement, disdain and disbelief, I soldiered on until all had been revealed. Of particular interest to my new friends was a rather swish chair contraption that was going to convert my sleeping pad into a temporary chair on the trail. The production of this gadget elicited considerable amusement from my audience, particularly when they pointed out that there are rocks and tree trunks conveniently situated and equally comfortable along every inch of the trail. I got a touch defensive over this and defiantly took the chair with me, only to leave it behind when I returned home for an unscheduled break. I had learned in my first 700 miles that taking things you'd like is less important than taking things you need. My Florida friends had been gently telling me that before I even set out. As usual, I'd been wrong.